to this edition of the EMS. As always, I am joined by my colleague and cohort, Philip Stoughton, down under there with beautiful Melbourne, Australia in the background. We are all jealous. Our topic today is, we wanted to talk to some companies who are EMS companies based out of Southeast Asia. So we've been fortunate enough to be able to get two gentlemen to join us here. Our guests today are Mr. Arthur Tan, who's the CEO of Integrated Microelectronics, affectionately referred to as IMI. They are headquartered in the Philippines with global facilities. Arthur will tell us a little bit more about that in a moment. We are also joined by Thomas Handojo, who is the Chief Commercial Officer with PCI Private Limited, headquartered out of Singapore with facilities in Asia primarily. Welcome, gentlemen, to both of you, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. We've been getting updates from various regions, and we thought it appropriate to speak to some people who are more Southeast Asian based. I'm aware that both of your companies have China facilities as well, but we've gotten kind of a view from within China. We wanted to kind of see what the rest of the market is doing, so you can hopefully lend your insights on those. So to begin, as we always do, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself. And Thomas, since you logged in first, I'm going to let you go first here. Why don't you talk about yourself and PCI?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Eric, for the quick introduction. So my name is Thomas Handojo. I am the Chief Commercial Officer of PCI. Joining the company since 27 years ago. So this is my 27th anniversary in the company. Started off as an engineer and then kind of moved to program management. And then I was promoted to become a VP in 2019. And today as a CCO, I have two portfolios. I take care of business development, that means the sales part, as well as the design engineering. Now PCI as an EMS, one of the unique things that we have big design team that also offer a lot of design in electronics, firmware, as well as mechanical. Yeah, so there's a quick introduction about myself.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that.
Sure.
And Arthur, tell us about yourself, please.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Hi, Philip and Thomas. Glad to be here. I'm Art Tan, based in the Philippines, but actually running IMI now for 21 years. So I was lucky enough. I started as the president when I joined. So the good news and the bad news, right? So you can blame me if the company didn't do well over the last 21 years, or if it did do well, then I could take that. But I started as an electrical engineer, and my career actually started in the US. So I was a semiconductor engineer, ended up in test, and then ended up in design, and eventually ran Asia Pacific for the US semiconductor company, which allowed me to go back to Asia. And from there, I transferred over to the EMS side of the business, which is where IMI has been. And I took over in 2000 and around 2000. So yeah, it's been good. We've transitioned ourselves from being just a purely contract manufacturer in the Philippines, and now moved on to a global entity where we have around 21 factories in 11 countries, spanning different technologies in manufacturing. Although the core business is still producing something, we've expanded our capabilities to the engineering and the technology side, developing our own IPs and so on. So that's a glimpse of IMI and how we have now transitioned ourselves into this global manufacturing company.
It's interesting, isn't it, Arthur, when you talk about the way you describe the business. I was talking to a couple of guys in Europe on a show last week, and we were saying the EMS term is no longer sufficient to describe what you guys do. It's much more of a, I don't know, it's a product partnership that you have with your customers. There's much more to it than just contract manufacturing, and that's true for PCI as much as it is for IMI. Is that something you feel it kind of almost needs a new descriptor?
I think it's
Arthur?
Yeah, I think it's just a natural evolution of what when it started as just purely contract manufacturing with very little technology and more labor intensive, and it evolved into more machine and equipment that was being provided, and then processes that were developed specific to the product, to the customer. So the evolution became EMS. And then what transitioned is that the separation of the electronic part from the mechanical part, that gray area soon converged. And so then it became a product, a subsystem, complete with both mechanical, electronic, connectors. And then the software started coming in, the embedded software that you now have to provide. The engineering now expands beyond just the ability to produce something, but the ability to be able to make the product work in different applications. And that responsibility is now transferred to people like us, Thomas and me. And so you're right, the natural evolution of an EMS is now transitioned from a CM to a EMS. And in fact, it's now between an ODM and an OEM type, because we're actually developing our own platforms that could be white labeled by our partners. And it's not the final product. And they still control the brand management for that. Yeah. So that's where the natural evolution, at least from our view, and maybe Thomas can embellish on that.
Yeah. What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah, so I fully agree with Arthur. In fact, if I go back 27 years ago when I first joined PCI, interestingly, PCI started off as a bareboard company. Yeah, it used to stand for Printed Circuit International. And it was actually founded in San Jose in the Bay Area, right? So there's history of PCI. Anyway, from PCB, in 1975, we also did LCD panel in Singapore. We were one of the first company that do that. Now, when I first joined PCI, I saw a lot of companies started to ask us to build LCD module. Now, for module means you need to have the electronics to combine with the LCD, right? So that is, I think, one of the ideas that PCI had at that time to move into contract manufacturing. So like what Arthur said, I remember when I first joined, bill of material is given, material was also given. We just basically built to print. So that's how we started contract manufacturing. Now, for the same customer that I saw that we built to print, today the customer is still with us and we do the whole design, the electronics, the firmware, the RF part of it, the certification, how to continue to upgrade their features and so on and so forth. Yeah, so it become a complete box build with a lot of electronics and IoT features and whatever have you. So there's a journey really.
Yeah, it really was that design component that allowed it to kind of evolve beyond just kind of board stuffers, to use an archaic term, right? So, which has really been the difference. And I think both of your companies, as I understand it, both are very strong on the design side. Now, Thomas, I know you actually have the design team as part of your purview as well, right?
Right. Yeah, so we have quite an extensive design team for the case of PCI, about 65 engineers right now. They do electronics, hardware design, mechanical design for plastic, mainly plastic, metal, and rubber parts. We also have a big group of firmware designers. So these firmware engineers are getting a lot more popular, especially in the last, I would say, 5 to 8 years. More and more customers outsource their firmware design requirement. We also recently added a very strong suite of RF design capabilities. We have our own RF chambers in-house that help our customers tune antenna and do all the, the RF part of it. Yeah, so that also attracts a lot of interest from customers.
Yeah, Thomas, are all your engineers in Singapore, or are they in different locations?
All of them, half of them are in Singapore. I have another group actually in Indonesia. And interestingly, my other group is based out of Philippines, where Arthur, I think, has a headquarters there, right?
Yeah. And what about you, Arthur? Your engineers are spread around the world or mainly in the Philippines?
It's spread around the world. And I think just normally, you can't really have the center of excellence emanating from one part of the world. You know, as what Thomas was saying, the RF side, that the Philippines and Asia seems to be okay with that. They're very strong that the power side and the motor side design part of it. I think Europe is much more stronger on that front. And then on the display side, we have the US and Japan and some European for that on that front. And I think for us, the design side actually carries weight for sure, but we've actually sectioned our engineering into different sites because we actually design manufacturing processes as well. So the design side for us is not just on the product side, but we actually build custom processes for certain products and services that we could do.
Okay.
So that's one facet. The other facet is what Thomas was saying, which we have product engineers who can then design the subsystems, the electronics, and then the whole box build part of it. And then the last part is the firmware part. So it's a triumvirate that's happening. And I think more and more, as what Thomas was saying, that the firmware is becoming more important, primarily because of the evolution of the IoT that we're seeing, that every single device that's going to be put out there with an electronic component has in some way either have to have some sensing or some level of connectivity. Right. And that's just going to escalate, right? And as that happens, then the need for having a single source of being able to provide all the bits and pieces to be able to connect that particular product within a full system or a subsystem then depends on the capability of the companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to see, isn't it, the way EMS is evolving, and it's almost that full stack offering where you can, provide everything from their ideation all the way through to final fulfillment and even end of product life. One of the areas that I think is really fascinating that we're seeing the rule book kind of being rewritten is in the EV market. So traditionally, the automotive companies would go through their tier one suppliers, and their tier one suppliers would perhaps use contract manufacturers. What I'm seeing is car makers, as they switch to EVs, thinking, okay, this is predominantly a electronic or technology product. Arthur's smiling. Hopefully this is resonating. But they're kind of relooking at their supply chain, and they're working directly with a lot of companies we would traditionally think of as EMS. Is that something that you're seeing, Arthur?
Right. So, I mean, what has happened is that because of this pandemic, it pressed the reset button across the world, and it actually accelerated the effect of climate change, the effect of globalization, and so on. And so this transition to the EV platform is significant. I think it's the most significant transition for this particular industry over the last 200 years. Wow. It's the same level as transitioning from horse to engine. This is what it is. When people were saying, I'll always take a horse from an engine, and then overnight, horses are all gone, and everybody moved to the steam engine. This transition to EV is happening at the same thing, and the car manufacturers, the OEMs, in the past were willing to work with the tier ones and the tier two, abdicating everything except the engine. Yeah. Because that was the brand. When you sell a car, and they market it as having the fastest, the highest torque, the number of cylinders, the efficiency of the engine, and you throw that all away in an EV car. So overnight, what would separate a Tesla from a Volkswagen if all you have is a battery and a battery management system and drivetrain? That's it. Single gear, one gear, and that's it. So the battleground has transitioned from underhood to interior. And in the interior now changes because of self-driving, the position of the driver, the experience of the passenger, and it's all touch and electronics. Yeah. So now the car companies are saying, wait a minute, if I abdicate all of these to the tier ones, what do I have? distribution channel. So now they're rethinking, I have to get that back. And that's why we're seeing now the active role of the OEMs in determining how the features, the actual technology that's going to be implemented in their vehicles are managed. And then we aggravate that by the fact that, you know, at the CES, you see a Sony car, you know, it's so a Magna car, Huawei announcing, Foxconn announcing that they're going to have their own EV car. Well, wait a minute.
Yep.
So if you're Volkswagen, Ford, you know, Daimler, what do we have, right?
Yeah.
And so that's,
you forgot to mention Apple in there too.
and Thomas and I are like in the middle of that.
Yeah.
So maybe one day Volkswagen will sell just the shell, and then, hey, you guys put in your own EV engine, and you know, maybe one day it can become like that.
Yeah.
Well,
It'll be like that PC
actually,
revolution where
Yeah, we're
everybody was
working
just
already.
buying motherboards. You can do the same with a car.
Yeah.
It's actually available now, Philip. I mean, if you go down into the supply chain of the main supply chain, and you look at the Hyundais, the Volkswagens, they already figured out that if they want and retooled everything in their portfolio, they don't have enough money.
Mm.
And so they need to partner with somebody with the building blocks.
Hmm.
And you see now this evolution of the next tier ones who are not the Bosches of the world, who are not the Valeos, who are not Delphi. They're now, you know, the Canoe, the Eldor. These are the building blocks of an EV platform. And they're the ones who are the ones that are now working with the OEMs, because like what Thomas is saying, and it's actually half true, is that they're just defining how the customer will feel inside the car, and somebody else they'll just pick and place a Lego type block of putting an electric vehicle together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I love the term that you used, Arthur, hitting the reset button. And when I look at the news and results that have come out of IMI over the last 4 or 5 quarters, the complexion of the last 2 or 3 has been completely different to the 2 or 3 before that. Obviously, the pandemic drove what was happening in early 2020, but late 2020, early 2021, some record results. Is that down to kind of rewriting of the rule book, or is that down to spike in latent demand? What's driven that good performance over the last 2 quarters?
I think it's just endemic to companies like us, like PCI as well. I think during that period of time, how we, Thomas, myself, and the other 4 players in this market adapted to that environment, with a view of what do we have to do now to make ourselves still be, you know, feasible or useful later.
Yeah.
And those things that we had to do during those first 2 quarters defined what the outcome will be for the next quarters. And I'm glad that my team was able to actually adapt to that environment aggressively, that we placed ourselves in a position that not only were our customers also had to rethink their position in the risk management profile side, right? Because in the past it was easy. You don't have to go, because when I talk to a customer and they say, well, it's par for the course on quality, it's par for the course on delivery. Like anybody that I talk to would be able to deliver the quality and the part that I want when I want it. What else can you provide me, right? And this pandemic showed that is not true. That is not true. And it amplified that need to have that partnership and the depth of the capability and the financial stability of the companies for them to be able to plan forward.
So Thomas, it's about relevance, isn't it? I guess it's about relevance, and as Arthur says, it's a lot about adaptability. How much has PCI had to change and adapt in the last 12 months or so, and how different does the business look?
Yeah, so it's very interesting what Arthur has described. I think, being able to adapt Arthur just now mentioned, which is, relationship is one. Now, assurance of supply, right? The stability of the company, how they are able to react to a certain situation and adapt into a new norm. We call it the new norm, is so crucial during this pandemic. So that is what we have learned. About a year ago, all of us were very concerned when the pandemic just started. Mainly because first we have to make sure that the health and safety of all our workers, right? There's an internal part. We do a lot of rigorous testing and checking. Thanks to the Singapore government, they have a very rigorous system and method to guide us on that. So we use that and implement that across in our various facility. At the same time, we also concerned about the supply chain. Even if our plant is running, if our suppliers, our partners, if their plant gets shut down, or if the border get closed, that will affect all the plan as well. So that was a very, very challenging and difficult moment last year, where everybody was still kind of grappling and wanted to find out what is the best way to adapt to the new environment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, thank God that a lot of company learn fast. For the case of PCI, I think also for Arthur from IMI, I think last year, in fact, our result was very good. We still grow about more than 10%, despite the pandemic. Adapting to new norm. There are some other segment of industry that actually were growing. For example, in our customer side, company that do warehouse automation, for example, huge growth because movement of goods, people cannot go to the mall. There are more online purchase and there's a need to have more warehouse automation. Even our customer in the, even white goods, right? More people stay home and then the orders just, go up quite significantly as well. Now, last year, PCI also have a very unique opportunity, and this one came from the government of Singapore. Because of the COVID, they wanted to make a Bluetooth-enabled device for COVID tracing that is implemented nationwide. And PCI was the company that was awarded. We are the first company that was awarded that project. And it is so fortunate that we are good in IoT. We have some design reference for Bluetooth-enabled device. We turned around the design and launched into mass production in just 8 weeks. It's unprecedented. I have never seen that before, including doing a 3D drawing, cut the tool, and go ramp for production in just 8 weeks. Anyway, so those are some of the things that we really learned. Even though we have to do more virtual call, I have not stepped into my factory in Batam for more than a year since the pandemic because of the border shutdown, right? So now Arthur is smiling. So also luckily, because we have system, we have people. That's very important. People on the ground has been with us for many years. They just know what to do to run, even though the leadership team cannot be on site with them. So daily virtual call like this, video call, it become really a norm now.
Yeah.
So tell me, one of the big challenges in the industry, clearly, and it's become even worse this year, obviously, has been material supply chain issues. And so how's that impacting your current operations? And, Arthur is an old semiconductor guy. Are you, pulling out those old business cards and those old colleagues and see who owes you favors? Or how's that playing out at your companies?
Well, the nice thing about being old in this industry is that the engineers that I used to work with are now guys who's running the industry. So yeah, you're right. I had to call favors for some of my friends there. I don't know if that's the reason why they knew they stopped answering my phone because everybody's just asking for parts. But I think it's just a cycle. We've seen this happen so many times. My fear now is, and I think they're going to try to manage that, is that we're going to double book again, just like what happened with LCCs. When we had the passives problem, we now transitioned that problem into this MCU problems, but it's similar that the capacity was reallocated and now we're going to have to reallocate back in. I think that given that this pandemic is not over by a mile, I don't think that the economies are all going to be roaring back in spite of all the positives that's coming out of the in spite of all the very bullish stock market. The reality there is that there was just a major shift of disposable income that went from services to goods. And so I don't think the total number has actually grown. I believe that it shrunk. It's just that the overweight into the goods side happened. And that's good for me and for Thomas, because we're in that side of the fence, right? It's pretty sad for everybody else, my friends that are in the services industry, in the tourist industry, in the hotel industry, in the restaurant industry. I mean, they're taking the hit.
Yeah.
Now it will start to balance out here relatively soon, especially for the larger economies, China, the United States, Europe, UK, because of the way that they manage their vaccines. But it will take a while to dribble into the other Southeast Asian economies, as we're seeing in the Philippines or in Singapore. Even Singapore had to go back, So we're going to have that leveling. I think that it's going to transition, that it's going to right-size itself fast enough that we're not going to see this prolonged supply chain issue beyond the third quarter. I feel like that we're going to see it. I'm still pretty bullish. In fact, my customers are still pretty bullish. My sense here is that when we do have push outs because of lack of supply or inventory problems, really, my concern is when there are cancellations.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen any. So we've seen push outs, we've seen delivery problems because of supply chain. We've seen a little bit of inflationary effects, which I'm watching very closely, because that's the other worry I have, because there's just the money supply that's being printed globally is so much that this inflationary thing is going to catch up somewhere. So that's what I'm watching. But as far as the supply side, I see a blip, but I don't think it's going to be a prolonged one.
Okay. So what's your opinion on that? How are things from the PCI side?
So I really, really hope that the last sentence that Arthur said is right, that it's not going to be prolonged, because the situation we are in right now is really daily calls, daily chasing for parts. That is what it is, right? And again, hopefully the other part that Arthur mentioned, that this is a cycle. I really hope that, yes, it's a cycle, and hopefully it's not too long. Yeah. Now, from PCI point of view, maybe Arthur has a better insight because he has a background as a Miscoll. From our point of view, we haven't yet seen the light in the end of the tunnel. At least for this year, 2021, it will continue to be very tight and still daily chasing, relying on relationship, people that we know pick up the phone and call and ask for help. Hey, I need parts, So that is what we are facing right now, really. Now, as far as the pipeline, the order, what I see is that it continues to be very strong. Whether this is due to the double booking the customer that is doing, that is another part we are watching, right? Because that sometimes can create another issue. One day when the supply is stable, suddenly the order just disappeared. That is in itself another issue. Thus, a very close discussion and open discussion with the customer, relying on relationship is very important. Differentiating what is real and what is a bit of someone just do the double booking. So this is the business. So we in a lot of things we still have to rely a lot on relationship and open discussion with the customers.
Do your design capabilities help in those situations then? Are you able to help with some redesign and do something, or how does that benefit you, if at all?
Yeah. To a certain extent, yes. For example, if there are parts that is very hard to get and we can design in an alternative, and if it is a plug-in with minor firmware tweak, then we get lucky. Very quickly we'll turn back into mass production. But sometimes even with the redesign, if it take too much of effort or too long of a qualification, then we know that it is still a challenge, right? So we explore all options, including buying from stockists. There is now, of course, we have to pay extra price and then discuss with the customers on how to manage that situation. But so far so good. I think we also start to find a pattern on how to respond to this current situation.
Yeah, you've got to get into a process where you find the parts where you can, look at design respins when that's necessary, and try and figure out. And then, as Arthur says, it's just a bit of a waiting game to get through this and see that balance. I think the most concerning thing is what Arthur mentioned in terms of double ordering and the potential inventory overhang and those cancellations and what that means, because we've seen ridiculous book-to-bill ratios, not just with the semiconductor companies, but also with EMS companies, where the order book looks a lot longer than it ever has in the past because people feel that's the only way to secure parts. The other thing that I think is impacting potentially on the order book is this idea of a kind of a shift in the idea of globalization in terms of supply chain, issues like supply chain security, people saying, okay, well, we're not going to pull all our business out of China, but we need a China +1 or a China +2 strategy. Arthur, is that bringing more customers to IMI, or is that your customers saying, can you make sure that you can manufacture for us in China, but also have somewhere else as backup? What's that doing for your geography?
For us, we've always, prior to this trade issue, we've always taken a view that it's going to be more regional anyway, from the get-go. And that's the reason why we have the 21 facilities over 11 countries, is because we mapped out the locations of where we can serve the European, Eastern European, and then the Western European markets, the North and South America market, and then of course China, Asia, and the rest of the world. So China in itself is also taking a different philosophy of how they're going to survive through this cycle of trade issues, right? So they took a centric view and now developing that they're not going to be dependent on the export market, and they're not going to be they're dependent on foreign investment markets. So they're developing internally, and the supply chain tied to that. And we're seeing that. So I'm seeing, an uptake. China has also been able to manage its pandemic issue. So the economy is back. And we see now that the volume and the product that we're serving out of our China facility for China is significantly growing. So that's on its own. But the one that we have as a China +1 strategy, which is the Philippines, we're seeing now that also getting a lot more attention, primarily because of the ability to be able to serve both Southeast Asia and be able to at least get around the trade issue with China. And so we can supply to that. The Philippines has a GSP plus with Europe, as well as a favored nation status with the United States. So from that perspective, the Philippines plays a very important role for our China +1 strategy. Yeah. Then the rest of it, we have Mexico, we have North America facilities, and then we have Eastern Europe and Europe facilities, and Japan. So it balances out that we can actually move products accordingly depending on tariff. Well, what's actually interesting now is that in the past, everybody was always asking. So first question they ask when they say, well, you're going to build it, and where do you want to build it? What's the labor cost? Right? Yeah. I mean, it's always, what's the labor cost? No. What I'm finding out now is that the tariff cost is actually much more significant than labor cost. So being able to manage the different trade imbalance of both the FDIs that's coming in, the type of NAFTA or AFTA that they have, and so on, and now with Brexit as well. So this is something that we watch very closely.
Yeah, and I think it's like you say, as we get to a more automated solution for manufacturing, that labor content becomes lower anyway. But then once you start to put in a high single-digit tariff, it blows away any cost saving that you might have from labor. Thomas, from a point of view of being in Singapore, are you seeing a gain in business from the China +1 strategy that people are adopting?
Well, I think the net impact, the answer to that is yes, because we have some customers that used to be manufacturing in China, and then they contacted us because they know we are manufacturing in Southeast Asia, right, which is in Batam, which is only like an hour away from Singapore here. Now, so on that side, yes, we do gain some benefit. Some of the new wins that we have, the customer told us that is one of the reasons why they are, looking up. Now, the other fortunate thing for PCI is that our Batam plant is the larger of the two, right? So the China operation is much smaller compared to what we have in Batam anyway. So even though there is a bit of a dip 2 years ago, I think after 2 years, we are able to put back the pipeline and pretty much back to what it was. So not too much an impact for us in China, but more like in total as a company.
Yeah, and Southeast Asia has just been a strong manufacturing location for so many decades, kind of before China was the big thing, people were in Thailand and Malaysia, and Southeast Asia's always served the market really well. Why do you think that is? It's kind of been steady, consistent. Is it down to, reliable workforce, consistent government? What makes Southeast Asia stand out as a good place to get stuff manufactured?
Yeah, if I may start on this one, we have started manufacturing in, say, I pick Batam, Indonesia, right, since 1990s. So, if I just compare the Batam with the China, I noticed that the turnover rate is so much lower there in Indonesia. Right? So I think stable workforce is obviously very important. Also, the maybe logistic part, right, between Batam and Singapore is a free trade zone. So move in and out of goods is very, very convenient. The borders open like 24 hours, and anytime you can charter a boat to ship goods out to Singapore and then, out from Singapore. So that type of convenience and stability, and also availability of engineers, right? We need engineers to run factories. So that I think kind of sum up why the Southeast Asia, at least from PCI point of view, where we operate in Batam. And I think the similar thing is what I heard from my colleagues who operate plant in, say, Malaysia. Yeah, so they tell us the same thing.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was going to say, if you go back far enough, I remember when Singapore used to be considered a low cost destination, right?
1970s was the lowest cost, yes.
Yeah, it was, but that's when but then it became really a center for supply chain excellence too.
Right.
Now we're all showing our age.
Yeah, I'll stop that now. So
let me just add something to why Southeast Asia is still attractive in spite of China being there as the main magnet, right, for the production. Our view is this first, it's 600 million people. 600 million people with an average age of 26.
Wow.
And consuming. And growing labor force. Highly dynamic, well-educated, multilingual. So that's the attraction. Because even if you build in China and you ship over to Asia, you still have to pay 5% duty. But if you build in Asia, anywhere, build in Singapore, and we ship to another ASEAN country, it's zero tax.
Yeah.
So that's one. You're now. What is 600 million? I think by GDP number, we are scheduled to be the third or fourth largest in the world.
Yeah.
By 2030. So that's the number that you need to serve. And then the last part, again, the reason for diversification on our part, we always believe that you have to build where you consume.
Yeah, and that's that regionalization argument that you talked about. One of the last topics I wanted to touch on was, and I think Southeast Asia does a great job of this, is the whole skills and talent thing. And I was really interested when Thomas said we need engineers for manufacturing, not we need operators for manufacturing. That's changed, hasn't it? You need engineers, you need skills, you need design, you need all those people. And Southeast Asia seems to have an abundance of that. The universities do that. Engineering is considered a very valuable profession.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think just also to continue what Arthur has mentioned earlier, designing a manufacturing process, right, is also a very, very crucial part. And of course, recently with the introduction of more AI and automation, our reliance on manual production operators become less. Thus, it is the engineer. So in the end, design and optimize a process. They are the one who carefully look at whether all the test coverage is enough, where are the critical area that need more attention in terms of the manufacturing process, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so you're right, Philip. Things has really shifted compared to what we have in the past.
Yeah. Arthur.
Yes.
Engineers key to your success in the future?
Always been, but I'm biased.
You're an engineer. You're both engineers.
So the reality there is that this industry 4.0 is going to happen, but it's not going to happen in the same way as it is in a developed economy, as it is in an emerging economy like Southeast Asia, as compared to Germany or Japan or the United States, right? So what we see, at least specifically for me in the factories I run, is what we have is what we call an augmented. It's a hybrid model where it's more augmented rather than a replacement. So it's not any direct replacement for automation, but then automation is used in order to enhance the capability of the skilled workers that we need. At a certain point in time, the complexity, number one, and the ability to be able to transform quickly is the two main factors that actually limits automation, right? As the product becomes more complex, then you have to program, you have to use a lot more robotics, you have to use a lot more, and it bogs down. So as long as you're going to build 1 million of those a minute, then you're fine. The moment that you only have to build 10 of those and then do something else after that, full automation is out the door. And that's why for us in Southeast Asia, I think that's our claim to fame, is that we have the ability to have enough engineering talent in the line, physical people, augmenting an automated line to provide that hybrid manufacturing. And that's an advantage that we have.
Yeah, and I think that's key because, automation isn't as adaptable as we would like it to be. It's becoming more adaptable. But one of the things you realize, the more you try to automate human tasks, humans are absolutely awesome. Their ability to multitask, their ability to switch from one thing to another, especially engineers. I mean, we're 3 engineers and a psychologist on this call. I reckon that's the perfect board for a manufacturing company. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, thanks. I'm making a note there. Phil's big on humans here. That'll be the press release.
I am big on humans.
Came out.
They're consumers. Robots are desperately bad consumers. They don't buy coffee. They don't buy iPads. They don't buy anything.
Yeah. But let me ask, I mean, as we need to wrap this up here, but let me just ask, kind of looking forward and, to kind of maybe pull some of this together. So what we're talking with the automation and the engineers, that costs money too, right? So, I mean, what are the challenges as you look forward for the next 3-4 quarters for the industry? We're coming through, hopefully Arthur's right that this is just a cycle and, things are better by Christmas time or whenever. But what do you see, what does your crystal ball tell you that how the industry and your company is going to be doing in the next 3-4 quarters? And maybe Thomas, we come back to you, sir. What does your crystal ball look like?
Sure, I will think that the next 2 or 3 quarters, well, at least from PCI crystal ball, right? You call it crystal ball. I think orders remain strong. We really see that and we can sense it when the customer really demanded a daily calls, for example, right? Meaning that it is real, the order must be real, yeah? So we continue to see pattern with that for many of our customers. So as far as the topic about the automation just now, the next, several quarters moving forward, we think that we'll continue to invest in that. But what Arthur said is very important. Automation, it has to make sense, right? It has to be, fitting a certain situation. For example, there's a steady volume or a certain quantity before we can do that. Yeah, so I think in the end, it is still a human judgment, an engineer's judgment, which one makes sense, right? Whether we augment a certain part or we automate the whole line and stuff like that.
Yeah. Makes sense. And Arthur, what's it look like from where you're sitting?
We're holding our budget and forecast 2 to 3 quarters. So like I said, I'm an optimist more than a pessimist. The black swans out there that we try to watch out for, I think, geopolitical continues to play a major role in how it's going to develop the markets. Each individual market will be able to recover on their own. I think the governments are poised to do that irregardless, because they have no choice, or else they will be voted out. So each of these governments is going to do everything in their power in order to bump up their own economies. So from a regional perspective down to a country perspective, I think we're going to see an upturn. What I'm worried about is the policies that these governments will be taking that will then affect the global supply chain part of it, or the global business as it happens. Because you and I know there's really nothing that's actually built by itself. I mean, we need each other. I mean, we still need stuff from China. We still need stuff from the United States. We still need stuff from Europe in order to be able to build a complex product. And the world requires more and more complex products. And this is where I think the value proposition that both Thomas's company and our company put together here is that we are now evolved to a level where our companies can now go toe to toe with our customers in order to build these complex products that they need in order to fulfill their entire product portfolio. So they could be very good in what I would call their family jewel products, but they will not be able to sustain their brand management unless they have the ancillary products across the entire spectrum. And that's where we come in. And so I think, I'm still pretty bullish about the next 2-3 quarters. So hopefully everybody will be sane and nobody will go crazy, like what happened with Ryanair and all that. So if we could just stay calm and everybody, then I think we'll be okay.
You're always going to have 1 or 2 crazies after that. That's inevitable. But what I think is really interesting is what you were saying about the business being so evolved now. You've evolved in terms of capability and where you connect through the value chain, but you've evolved massively in terms of capacity as well, and where you deploy that capacity around the world. So any brand around the world that is looking to deliver a product to multiple markets and wants a partner to help them deliver that technology all the way through to the consumer has a lot of options and a lot of really good choices now in terms of partners. And that's true whether they're in automotive, medical, or consumer goods, or pretty much anything else. So I, like you, I'm an eternal optimist and I'm always bullish, but I think we're getting through yet another disruption. We've realized that life's just full of disruptions, and as long as we're agile and adaptable, we'll survive and thrive. So I think it's a relatively bright future.
I agree.
Yeah, no, I tend to be an optimist as well. I think we all are on this. So I think that's a good note to end on here. I want to thank you both. I know that you hadn't met prior, but I think the collegiality that you both demonstrated and just the engagement, this has been a terrific discussion. And I thank you both very much for your insights and your participation here today. So anybody watching, if you have any interest in either of the PCI or IMI, you know where to find these gentlemen. I would point you to LinkedIn, as I always do, for follow-up. 2 excellent companies, and obviously being well managed. Gentlemen, thank you. Maybe we can get caught up another time in the future and get some more updates. It's always good to hear from our friends overseas here. So
stay safe, everyone.